Tobias Harris. And Tobias drills it. Sixers up one.
Embiid fakes. Embiid down the lane.
What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap Podcast. We are back after a little bit of a holiday break for me and James here. That, you know, the busy times with the family and everything else. So me and James' schedules didn't quite align. Had to take a couple weeks off, but we are back in action. And the Sixers are still leaving us plenty to talk about. So, James, how was the holidays, and how's your vibe check as this team's kind of hit a little bit of turbulence?
Yeah, man. It's been good. Feel rejuvenated on the post half of the new year here. I'm looking forward to the rest of the season, man. We're about a month away from the trade deadline, and I think we're going to see a lot of shakeups in the next 3 to 4 weeks with the Sixers and in the league in general. So exciting time of the year for the NBA.
Yeah, we saw the Knicks pull the trigger with the Raptors for kind of the first big deal of this NBA season with the OG Anunoby for Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett deal there, and now feels like that kind of set the tone for how things can go. And Sixers are a team that will find themselves in the mix. So we're going to talk about a little bit about some trade discussions. I want to dive a little deeper on Dejounte Murray. I know we've touched on him on here, but I've had some more concrete and complete thoughts on the situation. But first, we got to rip out some old scars, rip the Band-Aid off, because Doc Rivers, man, refuses to shut his mouth, refuses to not talk about the Sixers, take his shots. So I did want to get it and to lay out the full context. So Doc Rivers goes on the Bill Simmons podcast over at The Ringer that Bill Simmons and Doc have kind of been intertwined. Kind of a funny how that relationship has gone throughout their time, dating back from Bill Simmons kind of critiquing him as the Celtics coach and all the other things. But the bottom line is they've been frequent to hopping on a podcast together and talking. And Bill Simmons asked Doc Rivers about the troubles of coaching a team involved in trade rumors, on keeping the team on the same page and all those things. And then Doc Rivers sneaks in a little diss saying that Daryl Morey talks too much. And that was one of the biggest issues that he had in Philadelphia. The exact quote that he said was, I'll get it exactly right here, but basically saying, and the exact quote for what it's worth is, probably had many, but one of the problems that I had with Daryl is that he talked too much, and that referring to trade rumors and all those things. James, what was your initial reaction to that quote, and how thrilled are you to be talking about Doc Rivers in the year 2024?
Yeah, I think like it's just a big eye roll. Like every time that Doc Rivers talks, it's just like I don't even. I will avoid a game or watch it on mute or put it on the secondary television in my house if he's calling it. Even if it's not a Sixers game, obviously he's avoided doing that so far this year. But yeah, man, I really don't care to hear from him. And he's going on this like miniature press tour to try to cover his ass for the malpractice that he put onto this organization for the last 3 years. And I think we all kind of saw a disconnect between Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers, just like philosophically. I think that they go about basketball a lot differently. Seems to be that maybe they didn't see eye to eye the whole time. But I think it's a shame because Daryl Morey, no matter how many times he's had the opportunity to cut Doc down a little bit, he's always propped him up and given him a lot of credit and shown him a lot of respect through and through on national media, all the way down to like when he appears on the Ricky, when those guys are egging him on to, kind of shit on Doc and he doesn't do it. So it kind of sucks to see him not also take the high road with that and show Daryl the deserved respect that I think that Daryl deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. And for starters, on the Doc thing as a whole, this is the classic Doc Rivers of deflecting all the blame and accepting all the compliments. And in this specific situation, I think he's right about his point that, like, I get your complaint about a GM being as public as Daryl Morey, who I would say is probably the most public GM in the entire NBA, with him, the activity that he is going on podcasts, speaking, all these things. And I get that can be frustrating. Now, I do think Daryl is more guarded than Doc give him credit, that it's pretty rare that Daryl lets a significant kind of nugget of news that people can run with. He talks in pretty strategic code, I would say, when he does answer these questions, not in a way that I think has ever put the Sixers in a deficient situation when it comes to trade talks. And also the thing that I guess I was more frustrated with is, in the context of things, Doc Rivers, you were responsible for a great deal of this. Like the Ben Simmons situation, which was the most significant, I guess, like leverage situation that Doc Rivers was living through. That and a great deal was caused by immediately following Game 7 when Doc Rivers was asked, can Ben Simmons be a championship point guard? And Doc straight up said, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. Like, that was a big factor in leading to his trade request. And the relationship was likely broken already. That I don't think that was that specifically caused it. But in the context of this entire equation, like, that was far more damaging to the Sixers stance and trade talks and the team morale as a whole than anything that Daryl Morey had done. So it is more of the same. And my last point on the Daryl Morey side of things here is I give Daryl a ton of respect for the way that he goes about things, the way that he carries himself, and the way that he speaks on other people. We've seen this both with the James Harden and Doc Rivers situation where he's had ample ammunition and opportunity to just tear down these guys, and he's chosen not to. That he's done a very nice job propping people up. To me, that speaks a lot about a person, not just of like a professional athlete or professional front office personnel, that just people in general. Like, how do you talk about people when they've wronged you? I do think that's cool from Daryl. So quick shout out for that as well.
Yeah, I think Daryl's always buttoned up to a degree,
Yeah.
and even when he's not, it's intentional. So I don't really understand why Doc had to do what he did. I really don't know what it is with Doc Rivers. Is it a power trip or an ego or
So annoying, man.
yeah, whatever it might be. I don't really understand why he feels the need to do these things and why I was dreading so much to see that he was going to be going back to some national media outlets and being part of broadcasting crews and appearing on podcasts and doing all the things that he decides to do. But he seems like difficult to deal with. And I think there's probably record of us going back talking about the Ben Simmons situation being like, there's a fair chance that it's just Doc, that he just really did not like Doc and did not appreciate him. However they interacted, we don't really know the full truth, but can only imagine what that may have looked like. And he, for better or worse, handled it a certain way. So I don't know, man. I think it's good for us to just kind of move on. I think we can almost move this right into like a Nick Nurse conversation as well. Something like he mentioned after the Jazz loss on Saturday night, like, we're gonna get in there on Monday. And it's gonna be a physical practice. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not okay with saying, oh, we're beat up. Oh, our guys are out. Oh, we're just gonna lose. Like, that's fine. I'm not okay with that. That's an awesome perspective from a coach and like a complete 180 from what we felt from Doc, where he would have just been like, this is a scheduled loss. We were supposed to lose this one. It doesn't matter. And those are just different approaches to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final note on this is if Doc Rivers has any desire to get back in the coaching game, I would probably suggest stopping trashing front office personnel would be a good step towards getting there. That I don't think you're doing yourself any favors in the long haul if that is your goal. But regardless, I do want to switch gears and talk about the Sixers team at hand. No more Doc Rivers, and hopefully the last time ever. I do hope that is the case, although I'd love for him to be on the mic for Sixers versus Clippers. I'd be all in on that, still stand by that. Now, this Sixers team, it does feel like for the first time this season, has hit a little bit of a wall. That they did kind of hit some turbulence, back-to-back losses against the Knicks and the Jazz. The Jazz in a game which there was a ton of injuries, no Joel Embiid. That one to me is more of a brush off. The Knicks one was more concerning to me. That was a loss that for the first time this season, I thought we saw that this was a team that we know from years past. There's nights where the Sixers team just has not shown up. That was the first time I think we saw that this year. So, James, what was your reaction to those games as a whole, or any takeaways from those back-to-back losses?
Yeah, the Friday loss was, like you said, a lot more important in my opinion. Just watching the way that they look terrible on both ends of the basketball. It started with Embiid, and I think it kind of comes back to this as him as a tone setter, and we've seen it on both ends of the spectrum this season. I mean, throughout his career, but obviously he gets hurt. He twists something. He hurts himself on the very first play, like the first time he touches the basketball, and from there it was kind of over. Like, obviously there was a lot of opportunities for them to kind of crawl their way back into the game, and they had moments where they did put it together, but that was kind of from the start. He was not aggressive. It took away from his game a lot. He settled for bad jumpers. He didn't attack the rim. His defense was kind of lackluster, didn't protect the rim the way that we're used to seeing him. And he seemed frustrated at times with not getting the ball in certain areas. And it's just like, I don't think that is who Joel is. I don't like to paint him in that certain light, but when he gets into those modes where either things aren't going well or in that situation where he's not able to go 100% because he hurt himself, it sets a tone for the entire team. And they took on that energy from him and how important that is for him to notice. And I think that's important that he has that influence on the team. It's just sometimes when he doesn't use it in the correct way, it goes pretty terribly. And then in other times you see where he is very aggressive right from the start. And really what we've seen the majority of this season, and the majority of the last couple of years, where he comes to play and he sets the tone early, being aggressive and doing all the things that he does, it sets the tone for the rest of the team. So that was probably the biggest note, is just like right away from the start, they looked like they had no juice, and they really never found anything of substance throughout the game.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, my full read on the game is the Knicks shot the lights out that game. That I think that was what opened things up. But there wasn't this resolve, this bounce back, or this willingness to really scrap into this lead that I wanted to see from that team. And I felt like I was starting to believe was a characteristic of this team, that they held that on a night in and night out basis. So that was a big step back from a mentality standpoint and just execution standpoint, and maybe a little bit of a humbling experience after all these matchups with the Bulls and the Wizards and the bottom feeders of the NBA, that when you face a team like the Knicks, who I think are the fourth best team in the East, I think that we can lock them in after. I think there's a pretty significant gap, but it's obviously the Celtics, Bucks, Sixers at 3, and then I would put Knicks at 4. You can make an argument for the Heat or even maybe the Pacers, but they're in that mix of at least solid teams that are likely going to be in the playoffs. The Knicks are a tough team, so that is a game that the Sixers had to show up for, and they did not do that. Now, I did want to shift a little bit towards the Embiid conversation as a whole, because we saw that matchup that he has been battling this ankle/knee injury, whatever it is that it officially is. It all seems tied together. He's now missed 2 days of practices. He obviously missed that Jazz game the day after. What was incredibly frustrating to me was the Sixers leaving him in that game to get his 30 and 10 to continue this historic streak. Now, I get it. I'm in the most part, I'm in favor of Joel Embiid chasing these legacy, these accolades, these things. I think that should be important to players. That should be something you want to achieve. But what's been so cool about this streak is it's all happened organically, and it's all been conducive to winning. That they've been these masterful performances that lead the Sixers to a win. When you are leaving a guy in down 25 points in the fourth quarter, when Tyrese Maxey and the rest of the starters are off the court, there's just no excuse for that. And now that he's going to miss additional time, it just is such like a mismanaged use of kind of the risk versus reward here. And like incredibly frustrating, incredibly loser energy, and just super disappointing, both from Joel, from Nick Nurse, and the entire Sixers organization. So what are your thoughts on that, James? And like, am I wrong to be fired up about that?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just kind of lame, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
just, we don't need it. And especially after, you don't want to fuel the fire of the reputation that he, whether fairly or not,
yeah,
currently has, right? And I just think, I'm sure they'll look back and be like, oh well, we did this against, was it Toronto when he originally hurt his ankle, and then he played the remainder of the game and played well, and then he missed that stretch of time, and
yeah,
they probably look back at that and maybe use that as an idea of like, okay, we want to keep him going, for the swelling to, the inflammation to wait, or whatever the excuse that they're going to give us. But at the end of the day, he did not need to be on the court. That game was well in hand for the opposing team, and no other starters were playing. Obviously, Tobias went down as well, so he wasn't playing, and it was one of those where you're essentially conceding on all fronts aside from the Joel Embiid one,
right.
and what answer is there for that? On the other side of it, I don't really think it changes the fact, like, I don't think he would have practiced the last 2 days, and I don't think that he would play tomorrow had he not played after the first quarter on Friday night. I don't really
Sure.
think that would have changed. So I don't think it's going to end up mattering too much in the end, but yeah, it was kind of lame.
Yeah, and for the record, I have no issue with him playing through the injury after he did
Right.
it in that first play. It's when the game was in hand, him still being out there and him playing through it for no reason. That's the part that I'm frustrated with. And ankles are one of those things that like you can kind of play through it while it's still loose and while you do it that night. And it's kind of a next morning issue where you really get to judge the severity and what the issue is. Also kind of weird to me that the official diagnosis for why he missed the next game has been knee swelling. And then at practice today that he had a big kind of wrap all over his knee while he was out there shooting free throws. So a little strange how that is. We know that this Sixers team is fully dependent on Joel Embiid being at full strength. And the MVP race has gotten plenty of buzz. We know Joel wants it all, wants the accolades, and wants to compete for it. And frankly, if you're just asking who the best player in the NBA has been so far, it has been Joel Embiid. But he can now miss 9 more games, excluding tomorrow, so 8 after tomorrow, throughout the rest of the season. The brutal reality is that's not going to happen for Joel Embiid. So I guess my pitch here and my kind of mindset is is it time to just concede this MVP race already and focus on the bigger goals at hand of winning a championship? Or is this something that we think we're going to see Joel Embiid overexert himself and then run out of gas by the time playoffs happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the decision being made has to be like absent of chasing that number, right? Like I don't think that there has to be the decision to be like, okay, we can only let him miss 8 more games. How are we going to strategically place this throughout the schedule? I think it is as a need be basis. The first priority is being healthy come playoff time. I don't think anyone should argue that. I don't think they would argue that. Obviously, if he can go, I think Nick Nurse has always been in the favor of him going if he can go, and I don't mind that either. I think that that's part of being an NBA basketball player, and I think that it's time to embrace that. I think a lot of the other guys embrace it. Tobias does it. Tyrese is kind of a workhorse at this point as well. And you have Joel is a different situation. He's a different circumstance, just physically and due to his history, but I don't think that they should or would or will consider the MVP as part of the criteria of him missing or not missing a game. If he misses 9 more games, so be it. And if he doesn't, great. I think you have to kind of look at it less of a restriction and more of just something that's there. It exists, but it doesn't have to be your guideline.
Yeah, I think that's fair and pretty well said. For the record, 65 games played is the standard that the NBA has set. For reference, Joel played 66 games last year and 68 games the year before. And then if you want to look back at years prior, 51, 51, 64, 63, 31. So he has only hit this number twice in his career, and it being the past 2 seasons. I will say Joel Embiid has been far healthier than kind of his reputation. He does have these nights and these weird injuries flare up for sure. But the fact of the matter is we've yet to see a playoff run where Joel Embiid has been fully healthy and been fully himself. And I do think that is the leading cause, not the only cause, but the leading issue for why he has not delivered these monstrous performances that we've come to be normal for him on the biggest stage. That I think a lot of it has been health. And as much as that's kind of an excuse, it's also a very legitimate one that it's tough to, battle through this when you have a broken face or a torn meniscus or the myriad of other issues that he's dealt with throughout his time there. Broke his face like 3 times, by the way. It's bizarre, but
and
I
tore
do
ligament
think
in his shooting thumb. Like I think that's the one that gets passed over the most because he broke his face and then also tore a ligament in his shooting thumb.
That's true. And he hit that game winner against the Raptors with that torn ligament too. So yeah, shout out Joel, man. I want more than anything to just see him go on this playoff run. And if that does mean conceding MVP, I'm absolutely here for it. So I do agree with you that the decision is pretty much independent. Obviously, get him healthy and figure things out from here. But if this is something that is kind of lingering, to me, it's an easy decision that you shut him down for as long as he needs to be shut down for, and then still focus on the postseason. That's kind of where my mindset is at this point.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think that they're also going to be strategic in a way where like you take this game off, right? And that means now he's going to have off of either practice or games from Saturday all the way to the following Friday. So you can find stretches in your schedule like this where you have a couple extra days of rest and you can optimize that stretch by taking out one of the games and then giving Joel 6 days off between when his injury first flared up, and then take the first 3 days of that to completely get off his feet and not have, a physical night of basketball at all. And then the next 2 nights you can ramp up, and then the last night you can really be ready to go for your game. So like, I do think that plays a big part in him not playing in this stretch. That's strategic, and that's a good way to go about it because you don't want him to miss games. But like you said, I also think post trade deadline, depending on, I'm sure we'll get into this probably right now, but we'll see how the roster shakes out post trade deadline if they're a little bit more equipped to hopefully win a couple more games without him because they do look very dependent on him almost all the time.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And the last point I want to hit on before we shift over to the trade deadline stuff is Nick Nurse you mentioned during the Doc Rivers conversation, and you hinted at one of these quotes. So I wanted to put this fully out here. This is one of those moments that made me go like, Nick Nurse is the guy to lead this franchise. And he first hinted at it immediately following the game, saying that they were going to have a training camp style of practice when he was fired up after that loss. And then today, a couple of the reporters down at practice, shout out to Sam DiGiovanni of Clutch Points. He was on the show with me last week, which was an awesome episode that you guys can check out as well. But Sam putting these quotes out there, and this coming from Nick Nurse saying, I think we did. We had a training camp style practice today in length and in competition and all that kind of stuff. I think there were bits of about everything to prioritize, from transition defense to guarding the ball to shot challenges and all that stuff. And then one more quote that I liked from him here said, quote, certainly going to have ups and downs in any season. Obviously, the easy way out is to say, oh, we're beat up and we don't have enough people and all that kind of stuff. But I can't accept that as the coach. There's a way we want to play regardless of who's out there, and that's what I got to make sure I nip. So I absolutely love that quote out of Nick Nurse. As I said, that was a moment that to me was like, this is the right dude to lead this team. And I don't think the Sixers have had that fiery, that passion, that get in your face to hold you accountable really throughout the Joel Embiid era. That Brett Brown was much more of a positive, radiant, upbeat personality. And then Doc Rivers, I think, just fell short on the accountability in the way that we were sold is his style, and a guy that really never made this team practice ever. And I've heard from my ears quite a bit, talking to a couple people's inside the Sixers organization, of the night and day difference of both the tempo of practices and the consistency of practices. Of it does not matter if the plane lands at 3 a.m. the night before, they're still going to be out there on the floor the next day. So what's your reaction to those comments by Nick Nurse and kind of his influence on the attitude of this team?
Yeah, I love it. I think that I've felt this way this whole year. And some people will, I was like, maybe his minutes or some things get questioned. There's certain parts of his coaching philosophy that may get questioned. But I think as a motivator, as someone who's invested in this team, it is a great to see. It's refreshing. It feels great to know that this coach is more invested than all of us and wants to win way more than all of us and is going to take it very seriously. And it's part of the reason why when you think about people are asking, just in general, you have this conversation like, is this year going to be any different, or what's different about this team compared to other teams? And to be honest, that's the biggest thing I think for us. And obviously they're going to potentially go through this trade deadline and look a little bit different on the other side of it. But in reality, I think what is going to come down to is that Nick Nurse is coaching this team. And when the playoffs come around, that becomes ever more important beyond a regular season stretch. And no matter what the roller coasters of a regular season looks like, I do trust that come playoff time, he's going to be at full force. And that's the best that we can ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this like mentality and like just hammering home these points is so infectious and important to a team. Like one of the quotes that Nick Nurse has gone back and forth or hammered down a couple of times this season is when asked about resting players. His motto is you pitch your ace today and you hope for rain tomorrow. And as much as like I don't think that fully applies to basketball, obviously, and a little bit of that is in jest and in good fun, I still think that is kind of the right mindset, that you got to give your best effort every day. And I like that. Like Nick Nurse, I think, is inspiring this within the team and making sure that that is known as the standard in a way that it has not in years past. So very excited by that by Nick Nurse overall. Now, I did want to shift gears and get into the trade talks that, as we mentioned, NBA trade season heating up. And a guy that I've kind of come around on, that I've not been too high on, has been Dejounte Murray. So I want to kick things off with that conversation, James. What's your vibe on Dejounte Murray potentially being traded to the Sixers at this point in time?
I'm not in on Dejounte Murray, but I could be.
Okay.
I'm waiting for you to sell me, and I will listen to you. But I think the problem that I run into is like he's shooting well. He is shooting well this year, and he has been better. I just don't know if I don't know if he's the guy. Like I don't know what. Again, I'm sure his value isn't as high as it once was. So you don't have to empty the cabinet necessarily, but you're definitely paying a price for him, right? And I just don't know if you slide him into the 2 spot there, is he willing to be that third fiddle? Is he willing to give up the ball a frequent amount of the time and play off the ball? Is he the guy to come into this locker room and be a part of this squad and really not be the alpha in the room times 2? I don't know. I don't know if Dejounte Murray is a guy that coming in here is the right fit. And I worry that if that's the move that you make, he's a good defender, but I think that his defense is almost theoretical at this point. He is not what he once was meant to be as a defender. So I don't know. Tell me what you think, because I think if there's a meter of like yes or no, I think I'm probably farther on this side than I am on the yes side.
Okay, and I am having some lights blinking here, so shout out the storm coming through. Hopefully the
Yeah.
Wi-Fi hangs in here for the length of this episode. But for Dejounte, so I'll start by saying not a Dejounte Murray guy. That I've called his performances in San Antonio empty stats during his time out there, and still kind of feel that way. I think his defense, I think you hit the nail on the head that it is more theoretical at this point. That because he's 6'5" with a 6'10" wingspan, people picture him as being able of swallowing up guys, but that really has not been the case. His steal numbers have dipped some. He did lead the league in steals his final year in San Antonio with 2 a game. Those have sunk down to 1.5 and 1.4. Still pretty solid numbers there, but I haven't seen kind of the commitment to dig your heels in, get low and slide with a guy. Now, I think a lot of that is because of Atlanta. That Atlanta just straight up doesn't play defense. That Trae Young sets the tone with that there, and that the team follows. And my pushback to kind of him not having the ball in his hands, him all these things, he's kind of doing that in Atlanta already on a much worse basketball team. That Trae Young is incredibly ball dominant. And I'm honestly, every time I've watched them this year, I've been like surprised with how little Dejounte has the ball in his hands. And to lay out his full stats on the season, 20.9 points, 5.0 assists, 4.6 rebounds, 1.4 steals, shooting a career high 6 threes a game and connecting at 38.4%. That's significantly up from his career averages. Over his career, he's attempted just 2.9 3-point attempts per game and connected at a 34.3% rate. His catch and shoot numbers are much better this year. I'm believing that a little more. I think a lot of that has been a product of him learning how to play next to Trae. And there's no really team that you'll get better looks at than a team with Joel Embiid. That the gravity that he commands, every single shooter that comes to Philadelphia, Georges Niang, Danny Green, prime examples of guys that just saw leaps in their efficiency because you get clean looks that really just don't happen across the NBA. Now, I did want to slide one more question before I dig deeper into my sales pitch here, but if I asked you right now, Zach LaVine or Dejounte Murray, who would you rather have on the Sixers?
Puts me in a tough situation.
I know you're a UCLA guy, so I know that's a factor.
I do. I think that at their best, like Zach LaVine raises a ceiling more than Dejounte Murray does. So if that's what it comes down to, I think that I go with Zach LaVine there. And I think that I'm in the minority at this point with this, and I'm okay to stand on this hill alone. And I don't even necessarily think or know that it's the right choice, but in my opinion, a guy like Zach LaVine who has his deficiencies for sure. His flaws are public, but what he is elite at is something that every single team needs. He is a electric scorer on 3 different levels. He puts pressure on the rim as much as any other 2 guard in the league. And he is, from what I've read and heard, is not as like clutch or down the stretch as I think maybe I remember him, or maybe I think of him in a certain light, but a guy that can get his own bucket at any given time. And that's really important because when I think about the end of last season and the way the offense looked, and I know that is different this year, I've been the one saying that, but at the end of last year, what it came down to was not defense.
Sure.
It was not what they needed. Joel Embiid makes life so much easier on his teammates on the defensive side. When it came down to it, they couldn't score. With all 3, Harden, Tyrese, and Embiid on the floor, and Tobias the whole time. Those guys could not get a bucket. So that's what it comes down to me. And if I'm thinking that the only way out of that is to add another scorer, Zach LaVine is the way that I would go, personally.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. And I guess where obviously the price tag of each is very dependent on this, that there's been some real talks about the Zach LaVine contract scaring people off to the extent that this is almost going to look more like a salary dump than like a trade for a star. And by the way, Bulls have big time fumbled that bag considering what they could have gotten for Zach LaVine like 2 years ago and probably should have pulled the trigger then. But the bottom line is if it's down to the point where the Sixers don't even have to give up a draft pick. You're basically just taking in that contract. I don't know how you say no to that I'm absolutely on board. And I do think Zach LaVine is the better player to Dejounte Murray. I'm not debating that. But and when I talk about the contract, just to put on the table how bad it is, that he signed a 5-year, $215 million contract. He is in the second year of that. He's making $40 million this year. He'll make $43 million next year. $46 million the following year, and then $48.9 million player option in the 26 to 27 season. That's what Zach LaVine is on the hook for. That's the biggest, what keeps you away, along with the deficiencies, the injuries, and all the other factors that come with this game. as we shift gears to Dejounte Murray, this is a much more manageable contract and much more flexibility that I think to Daryl Morey, it's very important to maintain this flexibility. He's been crystal clear about that. This cap space plan to have open salary for whoever they deem the right players to fill out this roster this offseason, to put the Sixers in a unique spot where they're the only team in the NBA with an MVP caliber player, with an up-and-coming star in Tyrese Maxey, and with blank cap space for whoever wants to come join them. So that has been the pitch. Now, Dejounte does eat into that he did already sign a contract extension. But when I look at these numbers for him, he has an $18.2 million cap hit this year. Then when you look at the extension kicks in, $24 million, $26 million, $28 million, and then a $30 million cap hit. Now, that's still a lot of money. That's still a highly paid player, but we're talking like $10+ million less, like $15 million plus at the start of that based on what LaVine's getting. And that's a much more, I guess, manageable contract, and especially when you add in factors of the cap increasing, all these other things, the new TV deal, all these other things that people like to throw out there to talk themselves into big deals. But I think like that's a number that when we talk about an $18 million cap hit, that's Marcus Morris and a draft pick. That's that type of money deal. And obviously, I don't think the Hawks would accept that, but you get my point with that. So from the salary standpoint, I think Murray is going to be much more appealing to Daryl Morey. And I want to get your thoughts on that specifically before I shift back to the on-court stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like that does make sense, and that makes it more appealing. The thing that I am going to continue to come back to is like these guys are gonna make money, and trading for a better contract rather than the better player is a mistake in my opinion. And like again, that's gonna come down to like at the end of the day, like is Dejounte Murray going to be the guy that lifts this team from like the second round to the championship? Like in my opinion, the answer is no. So if that's the answer, why go out, trade for him, and then also continue to pay him upwards of $30 million for the next 3 seasons? Like, what if this is a fluke shooting season? What if he is just catching and shooting at 38% and he will regress back to his 34? And then you just have another guard that can't shoot, doesn't really play that much defense, and only shoots mid-ranges. Like, no, thank you. And it's not like that's going to happen. It's not like I don't like if Dejounte Murray got traded to the Sixers tomorrow, for surely I would buy into that. He's a very good player, but I don't know that he's the answer. So if he's not the answer to your question, you don't make that trade and you do go fully into next season with just the cap space plan. If you want to compete for a championship this year, a lot of guys are not available. A lot of guys are going to be way too much to trade for. And a lot of them are going to take a while to fit into this scheme. I don't know who else really is there, maybe a clunky fit. But if you look at a guy like Zach LaVine, obviously the contract is what it is. If Zach LaVine was playing instead of Tobias Harris for the last 4 seasons, the Sixers would have won, I think, a fair amount more, in my opinion. If he's taking the shots that Tobias would be taking or could be taking and making the money that Tobias would be making, this team looks a lot better and has a chance down the stretch because they don't need Tobias's skill set right now. They have wings, which is the first time you could ever say that.
Yeah.
They have those guys that can eat up those minutes and do what he does. They don't have another guy that can put up 30. They just don't. Tobias, he doesn't do that. He's done that once.
You don't think Dejounte Murray could be that guy?
I'm not convinced of it as much as I am of LaVine. But again, maybe I'm just not watching enough Dejounte Murray. Like that could be me.
Yeah. So I'm gonna fact check myself right here.
Yeah,
for points. So he scored over 30 points 5 times this year.
Okay.
So that's a couple.
No,
that's
good.
not. His high this season has been 41. He's had 41 against the Timberwolves. So number 1 defense right there once again. Sixers having some luck. Shout out. Timberwolves might be a flawed defense, man. I feel like as much as they like rank crazy, I feel like every time I look at a player's like career highs, like against Minnesota or like whatever. But
Zach LaVine put up 50 though.
Against the Timberwolves, well, this year, yeah, fair. I guess let me get back to my sales pitch on Dejounte here. So I'll start with what are the Sixers missing? So I'm very much firmly a belief that they need a guy, a creator, a guy that can get his own, create for others, all these things. They're not role players away, that they're a real deal guy. I think LaVine and Murray both fit that kind of category. I think they need another ball handler. I feel more confident in Murray being a guy that can run an offense for a couple minutes at a time when there's no Tyrese Maxey or when there's a stretch without Maxey on the floor. Murray is capable of being that guy. And I also think by bringing him in, that takes away the need for this backup point guard, the Tyus Jones kind of category of players that keep getting talked about as in a potential trade. So I think Murray can check that box. Defensively, I agree. It's more theoretical, but I also don't think he's been pushed defensively the way he can be. That I think under Nick Nurse, with that length, with that frame, with the way that they blitz and play defense, I think Murray can be way more effective than he is in Atlanta. And I think that Nurse is potentially the best coach to get that out of him. I agree. I think the shooting will regress to some extent, but it's not like these are ridiculous outliers. Like he's been in the neighborhood of these numbers. Like his shooting numbers as a whole, while 34 to 38% is a pretty significant leap, he had a season where he shot 36.7% from three. So it's not like, and a lot of his poor numbers, he shot 39.1% his rookie year on much smaller sample size. But the point still being like, it's in the ballpark of it enough that I believe that it applies. And I think like it's one thing to buy into a reduced role in Atlanta when you're playing next to Trae Young and like a fringe playoff team. I think it's a whole different thing when you're playing next to the MVP of the league and Tyrese Maxey on a team with legitimate championship aspirations. We've not seen Dejounte Murray in that type of role. I think there's a chance that he buys into this. And while there are some I don't want to say character because I don't want to put bad things on. There's just a punkiness to him that I don't really like. But I think there's a chance that comes out in the best way, where he's like that asshole you don't want to play against, or he's that Kelly digging under your Kelly Oubre, Pat Bev. I think there's a chance that he's more in that category than I've really given him credit. That I kind of have looked at it as more of a bad thing on him, which most players I look at as a good thing. That I like that as a characteristic. So I think I could talk myself into that in a way that I haven't in the past.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. I think, like I said, I think if he got traded to the Sixers and like first couple games, I think I would be pumped. I think I would be. And it's not to like take away from him, and he's a great player. But I just think like if you're going to, I think that he's going to, return some significant, like, I don't know what it will be, what the trade would be, what it would look like, but I do think that he would be, he's going to cost something. But what about Bogdanovich on the Hawks? Like
him as
another
well.
guy that I'm sure we could talk about there, but if that's the in-between move, I don't know. I just don't know. I'm not sold on it yet, but you're making good points. You're getting me there.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the fit perspective that it works almost a little better than LaVine as well. I like Zach LaVine. I think I like Zach LaVine more than the perception. And once again, like if this is a giveaway situation, I don't know how you say no to that. But I do think, and another point that I did want to bring up here, this isn't quite Murray, that this is more of a point toward LaVine if we're getting into it. But the 3-point stats this year, Sixers are making 11.9 3-pointers per game. That ranks 21st in the NBA. Their total threes made, 415 on the season, ranks 26th. Their 3-point percentage at 36.6% ranks 17th. Now, there's always going to be some inherent issues when Joel Embiid is your centerpiece because he's a post-dominant player, he's a mid-range dominant player, and those are efficient enough shots for him that it's fine. But the simple math of today's modern NBA is when you're trading twos for threes, you're not going to win that game. And too often this year, it's been the Knicks game was a prime example of the Sixers just being outshot from three, that the Knicks just purely launching more in a way that the Sixers cannot match that. And that's a problem. That's something that I've noticed many times this season. I expect to continue. They need a gunner. They need a guy that is going to let it fly from long range. If that's Bogdanovich and Murray, I'm absolutely in on that. If that's a Buddy Hield, which we've talked about the Sixers trading for every single year on this podcast, if that's Buddy Hield, I'm in for it. But I think like each of these guys, and when we're looking at what this trade could be, that I'm lasered in on getting like a high volume 3-point shooter. And I think Murray, while he isn't quite that, is at least like a step in that direction, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, but if he's going to play your two, like Melton is a better shooter than him. You want you'd want Melton taking more shots, especially off catch and shoot, than you would Dejounte Murray. And if you want to talk about like not only catch and shoot and taking and making threes off of the product of the offense, but also being able to take and make and shoot teams out of games. Like Zach LaVine does that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's a perfect player, but like when it comes down to it, like that's a guy that can play pick and roll with Joel and get his own bucket off that. He can play pick and roll off of basically anybody and get his own bucket off of that. He can cut off of Joel Embiid post-ups. He can catch lobs. He can run the floor. He can anything offensively he can basically do. Obviously, he has his issues on the defensive end of the floor, and he's not. I think in his sense, the ball handling and playmaking is more theoretical. He should be able to do those things. I don't think he does it as well as he could. But again, if you're talking about putting a guy in a system that is asking him to do a little bit less and taking what his strengths are and prioritizing those, he's a guy that could flourish in that. Where next to Maxey and Joel, who's going to be getting a lot of double teams, like who are you going to try to stop in that trio? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think I'd rather be that team that what the hell are you going to do on that side of the basketball than I would being like, we're piecing this together and, all together we're going to take 15 threes. Okay. I think I'd want a guy that's just going to go out there and kill you. And LaVine can do that. And again, maybe I might be hiking up LaVine a little bit. Definitely am. But that's just like in my head, that's how I see it.
My only like pushback and repackaging of this is I think one of the reasons that I've swayed towards Murray is Murray feels like if it doesn't work, you can fix it versus LaVine. It's like, that's the move. Like Zach LaVine's already on the books. That's your third piece for the foreseeable future. You're not repackaging that contract and getting any sort of plus value on it. Murray, I still think there's a world where you do that. If you try this for 2 years and you can want to get to that $28 million figure to trade him, I think that's very possible for a guy that's 27, has a fairly clean bill of health. That to me is very much a world of possibilities. I don't think that's the case with Zach LaVine. So when we talk about the flexibility, the keeping options open, for me, like Zach LaVine is the choice and the long-term choice. And I'm not ready to commit to that as the plan unless it's for dirt cheap and you keep all your assets in a way that you can undo it. But for Dejounte Murray, I feel like you can make this deal. You try it. You're still improving your chances of competing this year. And you still leave enough to where you can undo that. You can bring in something else or make it work in a different way is kind of one of the lenses I'm viewing it from.
In my opinion, if you're going to take the swing, like if it's worth it to take the swing, you go after Zach LaVine. If it's not worth it to take the swing, you don't go after Dejounte Murray. You go after a guy that you know is going to fit. You go after Buddy Hield or Alex Caruso or Bogdanovich or Bojan Bogdanovich or one of those guys that without a doubt is going to come in here, catch and shoot threes, run off ball screens, do all the things that a guy like that is just going to do. Like you could put Bogdanovich on probably any team in the NBA and they're going to find a way for him to catch and shoot 5 threes a game. That's just natural. That's how he plays. If Dejounte Murray comes in and it's like he doesn't really work and you gave up some assets for him and you come out on their side, it's like we really didn't swing for the fences, but we kind of just like grounded out trying to pull a ball to left field. And like that's way worse to me than hitting like a long fly ball and missing or like bunting the guy over to second. That was a lot of baseball references, but like you get what I'm saying.
But like the best version of Bojan Bogdanovich does not elevate the Sixers team with championship contender. I think there's a world where the best version of Dejounte Murray does that. Okay. I think this team needs a guy like Dejounte Murray can create his own shot. He can attack the rim. He can create for others. He's not just a spot up shooter. And that's part of the appeal of him that he can kind of do those things. But I think the Sixers team needs another guy that when the shot clock's winding down can go make things happen. And I do think Murray can. I think there will be games where Murray is going to take over to an extent and have his 30-point night that the team needs to get a win. It's clear to me like there's enough room in this team shot diet for a guy to be filling those. And I don't think Bojan Bogdanovich is the answer or Alex Caruso is the answer. Like, yes, those are helpful players, but to me, like, I almost feel like that's more of a waste because I don't think that changes the championship ceiling of this team or improves the Sixers' chances to an extent. I think Murray's the type of talent where it might.
Okay. If that's not the way I see him. So if that is hearing that from your perspective definitely makes more sense why you'd be like, okay, go get that guy then. Maybe I just don't watch enough Dejounte Murray. And it's funny because we were literally saying before we got on, like, I think 2 years ago during the Ben Simmons saga, I think you were on where I am, and I'm currently on where you were. So it is funny to see how that changes with us. But I don't know, man. I think he might be like the only guy in that middle tier of like not making a ton of money and not going to take 5 picks to get, or not just a middle of the road piece that like will help you win a couple more regular season games and might swing a playoff game, but isn't a game changer for sure. But one thing I guess we can kind of, before we wrap up, like, what if they made 2 of those smaller moves? Like, that's kind of what has been reported so far, is like they're willing and able to make multiple moves. Would you prefer to do like two of those things to upgrade two spots rather than one big move, or, a Dejounte Murray sized move?
Potentially if it's like the right pieces, but I still trend towards no. I still trend towards like it needing to be a guy. Like
Me
Dejounte
too.
Murray, for regardless of your feeling, like that's a top 75 NBA player. Like he's within that realm of conversation. Like I think they need something top 100 for sure. I think top 75 absolutely. But like that caliber of player, like again, no disrespect to the Bojan Bogdanoviches or the Buddy Hields of the world, but I just don't think that moves the meter for this team. And in the end, as much as we sugarcoat it, like it depends on Joel Embiid, man. It depends on whether that guy's ready to kick it into gear in this. And I think like just supplying this team, Nick Nurse and everyone with the most possible options, I think is that. And to me, like that's getting another dude, I feel.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I definitely would agree with you. I mean, and they're in an interesting spot with the fact that they do have a ton of cap space, and anyone can kind of be sold on that pipe dream of like, imagine all the free agents we could get. But I think I always come back to the fact that like, dude, who signs with the Sixers?
Yeah,
Nobody.
it only works if they come. Like, you know.
Yeah, it's only in theory. So I mean, Paul George loves Joel. Apparently, we saw that on his podcast today, and I don't think that's enough to bring Paul George from LA to Philadelphia, or whoever else is a free agent this summer. But I don't know, man. It's interesting to me just because I feel like they're in like I think about it all the time, dude. I could not do this job. I'm freaking out about it constantly, and I don't even. It has nothing to do with me. So I'm curious to see what they do. I hope they do something. Like they have to do something, right?
Have to. Yeah.
They have to. Like they're going to, and it's not going to be Pascal Siakam.
You
I
just can't.
promise you that.
Yeah, you just can't waste these years with Joel Embiid's prime. Like it would be organizational malpractice, I feel, if they don't go for it. If they don't at least try something to improve their chances. But that is why Daryl Morey gets paid the big bucks, man. That's why we get to critique him or praise him either way, let him make the decision there. So we do have plenty of time before the NBA trade deadline, about a month left. So I'm sure there will be plenty more rumors, plenty more talks heating up. We will get the Sixers back in action without Joel Embiid, no less, tomorrow night. So James,
They're
any
gonna win by
final
10.
win by 10? I like that. Is that's your closing thoughts? They're winning by
That's
10
my
tomorrow?
closing thought. They're gonna beat the shit out of the Hawks tomorrow.
I love it.
That's my thought process.
Well, I want to hear your honest review of Dejounte Murray immediately following that game.
I will.
So
That's okay. Good deal.
there's the homework there. And for everyone else, thank you guys for tuning in. I want to hear your Dejounte Murray thoughts in the comments as well. So let me know what you think. Are they one Dejounte Murray away? We will see. Plenty more time until the trade deadline. But once again, thank you all you guys for tuning in. Make sure to smash that subscribe button, drop a like. We'll be back with you next time right here on Pick Swap Podcast.